Hi everyone, this is Sammy, the registered dietitian over here at Bluegrass Community Hospital. Today kicks off our 8-week weight loss program, and we are super excited to get to pilot it with you. Today we'll have Cindy kind of covering how to follow our Olive Back program, and then my part for today is kind of explain what the Mediterranean diet is, why it's an important diet, and how to follow it throughout this process. We chose this specific diet just because we got some cool poll results from you guys about a few months ago or so, and this was kind of the most popular choice we had. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so the Mediterranean diet came around the 1950s era. Researchers were starting to notice a significant difference in the prevalence of heart disease in Americans compared to those who lived around the Mediterranean Sea. And that's where kind of the interest became to see, differences in how they followed their diet versus how we followed our traditional American diet. So as you can see here, this is kind of a visualization of where that area is. It's, all those different countries around the Mediterranean Sea. And when we talk about the Mediterranean diet, this is kind of, specific area we're talking about when we're looking into their traditional food and cooking methods compared to ours here in America. So the Mediterranean diet is really important because it has been found to improve so many different things, such as chronic inflammation, cancer, type 2 diabetes, obesity, pulmonary disease, blood pressure, weight loss, all these different things on the bullet points that we have listed here. It's also really important because all of these things are research-based, over the past years. So I think that's a pretty incredible amount of things to be improved just by, following a Mediterranean diet lifestyle. So what's interesting here is that the Mediterranean diet was actually ranked the best diet for 2021, while keto remains one of the worst. So when we are looking at Mediterranean diet, it's going to be very heart healthy for us. And I know a lot of people like the keto diet per se, but I feel like the keto diet isn't great as for our hearts, just because, you're not getting any of those whole grains or anything like that we really need for normal bodily functions throughout the day. And you're going to be eating more of those foods that are saturated fats like processed meats and dairy and things like that versus a Mediterranean diet. It's kind of a healthier incorporation of those things. So as far as heart health, the Mediterranean diet is definitely one of the best diets you can go with. So now that we know a little bit of the background of the Mediterranean diet and where it comes from, we're going to talk about how to follow it. So this diet kind of has its own food pyramid, and it kind of goes into breaking things down as to what you should eat daily, weekly, and monthly. And you'll see that kind of characterized on our Olive Bag list. Things that are going to be in green are going to be items that we want to consume on a daily basis. Those or that orangish yellow color are going to be foods that we want to consume probably more on a weekly, like 2 to 3 times per week, maybe 3 to 4. Then as far as monthly, that would be more, probably 1 to 2 times a week for certain foods, and those are going to be what you see on there in red. But basically, as a whole, this diet is really has a huge emphasis on eating, generous amount of fresh vegetables, whole grains, vegetarian proteins, olive oil, and nuts. Okay, so this is our Mediterranean diet pyramid. What I like about this is that it does emphasize how important routinely exercise is throughout the day. Trying to get a minimum of 30-60 minutes per day of exercise. And my recommendation with that is starting off slow, maybe, starting off every 2 to 3 times a week for about 20 to 30 minutes at a time, and finding an activity you like. It doesn't have to be strenuous exercise on a treadmill for an hour straight every day. It could be going around short bouts on work or parking further away from where you're going and having a little bit of, longer way to go. So getting some extra steps in that way. I'm just trying to find things that you really enjoy. And then moving on up, this is going to be the foods that we want to try to incorporate in our diet every day. These are going to be the items that are in green in our olive bag. These, of course, are going to be vegetables, fruits, whole wheats, grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, legumes, and seeds, herbs, and spices too. And then moving on up, it does encourage you to try to get a good source of fish and seafood, 1 to 2 times per week. If you look back at that area, you can kind of guess they probably have great access to fresh seafood and things like that. So it doesn't kind of surprise me to see that included in their diet. Excuse me. And then moving on up, we have weekly. So these are going to be things like poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt. And then at the top, less often, of course, is going to be kind of like our red meats and our sweets. And then over to the side, I think this is kind of cool that they include this in here, but, a glass of red wine in moderation throughout the week, that's a very nice addition to this diet. And then, of course, it does encourage water every single day. I'm trying to steer clear of those sugar-sweetened beverages from like colas and juices and different things like that. Water flavorings are okay to kind of help you get in some water throughout the day. I think generally you want to try to at least hit about 64 ounces of water per day if you can. So now that we've kind of gotten the big picture of the Mediterranean diet, we're going to kind of dive into each section of those areas. So moving on into the daily things that we want to incorporate in our diets, that's going to be about 4 to 8 servings of non-starchy vegetables. And non-starchy vegetables are just going to be things like, tomatoes and lettuce, celery, cucumber, things like that. If you look down a little bit, it kind of talks about, trying to get 4 to 6 servings of whole grains and starchy vegetables, which those are going to be things like your potatoes, peas, corn, squashes, things like that. And then, of course, we want to get about 2 to 4 servings of fruit per day. 1 to 3 servings of nuts and legumes is important just because where this is kind of a plant-promoted diet per se, it's also important to make sure we're getting our protein from plant sources on those days that we're not eating any meat or things like that. So it's really important to make sure that we're upkeeping our protein intake during our weight loss journey. And last but not least, 4 to 6 servings of healthy fats such as olive oil, and those can be incorporated in different dressings or of course in different cooking methods with however you cook your foods. Alright, so moving more into a weekly basis, these are going to be items on our olive bag list that are going to be colored in orange or yellow. We want to try to get about 2 to 3 servings of fish, 1 to 3 servings of poultry. And with that, I want to add in, it's also really important to pay attention to our cooking methods. Trying not to fry these items as much as possible or add thick coatings all the time. It's okay every once in a while, but just trying to cook it in a leaner way, maybe splash of olive oil in a pan and then baking it that way, or just kind of like coating a pan and then putting in the oven. Those are a little bit healthier ways to cook it and make sure that we're kind of staying on our weight loss journey through the next 8 weeks. Moving on down, we have about 2 to 3 servings of whole eggs, and 1 to 3 servings of dairy. And of course, we want to try to stick to lower fat items like lower fat dairy, low-fat cheese items, more skim milk or even 1% as a compromise, different things like that. Okay, so now we're down to things that we should probably consume more on a monthly basis. These are going to be items that are in red on our olive bag list. These are going to be like red meats, beef, veal, and lamb, and sweets are also kind of on the same page as the red meats. It encourages us to try to eat these items only about 2 to 3 times per month, which I know that might be hard for some of us, so if it's a little bit more realistic, maybe trying to stick to it maybe more once a week, or, following these guidelines, whatever works best for you. And with sweets, I have a big sweet tooth myself, so I know it might be kind of hard to stay away from these things, but this is where I encourage people to get a little bit creative with their favorite things, and just trying to find different swaps that you can make that are a little bit more compliant with the diet, and that way you can still kind of get your fix. An example would be, instead of eating brown sugar Pop-Tarts in the morning, and trying to swap it out with some brown sugar oatmeal. And, that swap right there would give you a much more of a complex carb, and it's a lot healthier over those brown sugar Pop-Tarts, and it's going to keep you fuller longer. So just trying to get creative and think of ways that you can make those healthier swaps throughout this process. Then this slide just kind of talks about what was on the side of that pyramid, making sure that we're drinking plenty of water throughout the day, and also maybe enjoying some wine in moderation if that's warranted. I think about 5-ounce pour would be kind of an appropriate serving size when it talks about red wine, and probably more just a couple times a week, or as you enjoy it. So it's definitely a fun part of this diet that we get to keep that in. All right, so now that we kind of got our bases covered, now we're going to talk about shopping for the Mediterranean diet in our local stores. So some of you all might have heard this before, but before you go to the store, try not to go when you're hungry, just because you're going to be more likely to be adding things to your cart that you may not need. And I think it's always a good idea to make a list and stick to it. That way, you know, you're not just kind of adding things here and there. It's a good way to save money too, and it just kind of keeps you on plan. So just set yourself up for success and have a list to go to. And then generally, some of you may have noticed that when you go into stores, the perimeters of like the outside of the stores are going to be a little bit healthier sometimes, depending on the store, of course. So I guess in some places, the further you go in, the more processed items you might find. So just kind of trying to avoid those areas when possible, so you know they don't get you. And of course, don't get derailed at the checkout line. You know, they have all those goodies there, so just kind of try to, you know, avoid those things when you can. Just some little tips and tricks right off the bat here. So let's say we're starting to look for fresh produce first on our grocery trip store. The more colorful the vegetable or fruit per se, it's going to have a lot more nutrients in it. So right here you see Eat the Rainbow. So it's important to incorporate all sorts of colors throughout our diets. And of course, choosing in season is what you know you're going to get as far as best quality and price. We have a list of examples here. You know, let's say we're approaching fall time, so of course fall we're going to see those pumpkins, sweet potatoes, cauliflower, and apples. Those are really going to be items that are in the prime of the season. More on fresh produce. So this diet does encourage the usage of fresh herbs, you know, trying to flavor our foods with these herbs versus, you know, using a lot of salt to flavor enhance. Fresh basil, parsley, oregano, garlic, you know, different seasonings for fish and chicken. A lot of, you know, just a little bit will go a long way with these different things. You can also get creative and use some fresh citrus, like some squeezed lemon or lime, things like that, to add a little bit of flavor onto your meals. Moving on into the dairy section, we have 3 different areas here. We have our Greek yogurt. So what's awesome about Greek yogurt is that it's usually about double the protein for the same amount of calories. And of course you can find lower or no sugar added versions of Greek yogurt as well. And then we want to stick to low fat or skim milk, and avoiding, you know, those whole milk and 2% milk when possible. Some of you might like different nut milks, like our soy-free milks or different things like that. And those are okay too, you know, whatever fits best within your lifestyle. Moving on down, we have cheeses. So a lot of cheeses that are incorporated in this diet are going to be like Parmesan, Romano, and Feta. They're going to be a little bit lower in fat. And when you're kind of comparing it to like cheddar or those darker orange colors of cheeses, those darker cheeses are going to usually be higher in fat. So that's why it's kind of sticking to ones that are a little bit that whitish color. And a little bit also does go a long way when it comes to this, because, you know, of course it's awesome to sprinkle some cheese on everything, but sometimes, you know, if we sprinkle a little bit too much, that can add on a little bit of extra calories that we are trying to avoid on our weight loss journey. But, you know, definitely use cheese to spice up a salad or, you know, some soups. You can almost put it on anything really, but just remember, like we said, a little bit can go a long way. Going on down, we have eggs or egg beaters, and egg beaters are kind of those things that are like kind of pre-made eggs per se, where you can just kind of pour it in a skillet and go. It's suggested not to try to consume 3 yolks of eggs per week, just because it can have a little bit of high cholesterol content. So sometimes when I tell people who really like to eat eggs every day but are watching their cholesterol, maybe try using just 1 egg fully and then cutting it or adding in a little bit of egg white to it, just kind of making a good mixture, because when you mix the two, you can't really tell how much of that yellow you're missing per se. So just kind of keeping an eye on that, but of course, you know, egg whites are going to be unlimited. Moving on to oils, this is where we want to stick more to olive oil or nut oils, vegetable oils, and oil sprays. Sometimes with different oil sprays, they have versions that are actually like 0 calories or very low calories, so that may also help us well if you're kind of watching those too. Going on down, we of course want to avoid the solid fats such as like those shortenings and butter when possible. So nuts and seeds, you know, these are going to be healthy sources of monounsaturated fats, even a little bit of fiber, and protein, of course, which is always super important. And we want to try to stick to unsalted varieties when we can. And then, of course, watch portion sizes just because they can add up very quick. I would say about 1 ounce is probably, you know, a normal portion size for nuts and seeds. And on average, it could have about 100 calories. So, you know, we don't want to eat too much, you know, just kind of watching our portion when it comes to these, you know, more of sprinkling it on foods when possible, like salads, soups, or even oatmeal, different kind of things like that. All right, so beans, another good source of protein for us. So this kind of talks about choosing dried beans versus canned beans. So dried might be a little bit of a lower cost, but they also are less, not as high in sodium. Beans are very high in fiber and potassium, a very heart healthy food overall. An average serving size of this is going to be about 1/3 of a cup. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about seafood and meats. Of course, we have our nice picture over here, different seafood aisle at the stores. We do want to try to get about 2 to 3 servings of this per week if we can. Seafood has a lot of omega-3s, which is super heart healthy, and that's going to come from things like salmon, mackerel, and our white fishes. And then we also want to talk about poultry, which we mentioned earlier, going for a goal of about 1 to 3 times per week. And then, of course, we have the red meat, about 1 to 3 servings per month. Okay, so grains and baked goods. Here we do want to try to get about 5 to 6 servings per day, and including starchy vegetables like potatoes, peas, and corns. These are going to actually have a little bit of fiber in them, which of course is going to be great for our bodies. A fun fact I do want to throw in here, because a lot of people are so scared of carbs, the Institute of Medicine actually recommends about 130 grams of carbohydrates per day just for healthy brain function. And naturally, we can hit these as long as we're incorporating these throughout the day, but I do like to throw that in there as a number just to kind of give people an idea of, you know, why they're so important. It's definitely our body's preferred source of energy, so always trying to get in some good carbs in. So these are also, you know, when we say get these good carbs, that we want to stick to more complex carbs, and we want to avoid those pastries, cookies, cakes, and muffins, which are going to be higher in fat. And when we look at bread and rice, we're going to want to choose ones that are more whole grain or whole wheat, just because they aren't as stripped as much. And what I mean by that is when you kind of have the seed that is pulled for bread, the grain itself, when it's white bread, they kind of strip away the excess layers, and a lot of fiber and nutrients are in those layers, so that's why we say kind of whole wheat and whole grain, because it has more nutrients and fiber overall versus kind of the white breads and things like that. And we want to try to look for about 4 grams of fiber per serving when we can. So the condiments and pantry aisle, this can be a little bit of a sneaky aisle. What's really important here is that we're paying attention to our nutrition facts labels and watching our sodium, fat, and sugar content of these items. Things that can have a lot in there, more than we realize, would be like salad dressings, ketchup, barbecue sauce, and soy sauce. So here it's really important to choose lower sodium versions when we can, or lower calorie items, of course. And especially just, you know, exercising portion control. maybe once in a while, actually seeing what a full tablespoon of ranch looks like. It might not be as much as you think, and you might be kind of overestimating it sometimes when you use it. So, just paying attention to portions, of course, is always important. So moving on to the freezer section, and now I know this diet kind of earlier emphasized more fresh vegetables and produce when we can. Sometimes it's just easier to get things that are frozen already. It's easier for meal prep, sometimes it's just easier and takes less time and effort to cook. So I'm definitely, not telling anyone to steer away from these items just because for me, I use them all the time and they do save me a lot of time. Like it says up here, they're convenient. Sometimes it can be less expensive. And what's cool about them is everything is in season. As a dietitian, sometimes I get asked, those foods that are frozen, do they lose a lot of their nutrient content because they're not in their natural form? And while they may lose just a little bit, overall, those nutrients are still there. They're actually, so let's say we have green beans as our item that we're looking for. So those green beans that are frozen are actually going to be picked at their prime time just because they're going to be so abundant at that time. So they're going to have all those excess to freeze. So when you're getting these items that are frozen, they're going to be picked during their prime. So they are going to still have all those awesome nutrients in there for them. The thing to really watch out for here is sometimes frozen items can be a little bit higher in sodium. So, of course, going back and paying attention to our nutrition facts label and watching out for vegetables that are kind of like coated in cheesy toppings or butter and things like that. Another great item that you can find here is where we're kind of like maybe cutting back down on red meat a little bit. Is finding some different meat substitutes, and that can be veggie burgers. They have all sorts of different things out there nowadays, kind of for, vegetarians and different swaps and things like that. And then use caution. Like I said, frozen entrees and frozen foods in general can sometimes be higher in sodium, just trying to, with preservation methods and things like that. And then frozen desserts, of course, they're going to be higher in fat and sugar if we're looking at like certain ice creams or frozen pies and things like that. So that kind of wraps up our grocery tour for the Mediterranean diet. This is just a fun little slide we have in there. Here we are at the checkout lane. Of course, this is where you're going to see all those sweets and treats that they try to get you with. So, just try not to be derailed by junk food when possible. Like I said, it's okay every once in a while, but overall, try to avoid them when you can. All right, everyone. So that is kind of the Mediterranean diet in a nutshell. Hopefully I covered everything okay, and I just want to say thank you for sticking in there with me. This is actually my first time recording on PowerPoint this way, so it's kind of a fun experience. So thanks for sticking in there with me again, and I'm really excited to work with everyone, kind of get to know everyone who works here a little bit more. So like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And let's get this started, and I can't wait to see everyone through their weight loss journey.